What do we want this dream to be, this new episode for humanity? What do we want it to be? If this is about regaining our sovereignty,
Yes.
we've given away our power to leaders, politicians, all of those external authority figures. But we've equally, I believe, given away our power to the planets.
Welcome to New Earth Podcast, where we dive into inspiring stories, profound wisdom, and insights from remarkable individuals who are driving the consciousness shift on our planet. If you're ready to elevate your awareness and well-being, you're in the right place. Together, we'll continue to explore the ideas and conversations that help you up-level your consciousness. Thank you so much for your support and your comments and for being part of this journey. Hi, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Pam Gregory here today. And a big thank you, Pam, for saying yes to come and have this conversation. I'm so excited to see what we talk about. I'm sure that you all know that Pam is an internationally renowned astrologer who's really a guiding light that illuminates the path that we're all heading towards New Earth at this time, helping us navigate that transformation. So big welcome, Pam.
Bless you, Sarah. Thank you so much for that wonderful, warm welcome. I'm just trying to do my best along with everyone else, but thank you. It's a joy to be with you and share this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd love to chat with you today about what it means to be human, because I feel like that is changing at this time. You know, consciousness, there's just so many old paradigms that are being broken that we're having to kind of accelerate into a new consciousness, a new state of being. Yeah. So I'm interested in really chatting about how the astrology sits with that and can support us to navigate these personal and planetary shifts. So I guess, a good place to start would be to talk about astrology in terms of, do you see astrology almost like being a divine plan that's unfolding at this time? And to that extent, as a human being, how much personal agency do we have in terms of, is it all predestined, or how much free will is there in that?
Great questions, Sarah. So to come to the second question first, it's very interesting that in my work, I've always said that your birth chart is your unique sheet of music. And therefore, the pattern for this lifetime is determined, the symphony that is going to be played. However, the free will, the latitude comes in how we play that. We can have a little life or we can have a big life. We can just bang an old tin rusty box with a spoon for our symphony, or we can do something magnificent. And over the many years I've been practicing astrology, I can say that because very often I've looked at similar charts over similar time of birth, similar geography, and the patterns are the same in terms of how those people lived out their lives, but to a very different level. And that isn't my judgment. I mean, I have no place to judge anybody, but I remember it was a few years ago, there were two guys who didn't know each other, and they had very similar birth charts. And they were both very musical. One was a teacher in a comprehensive school locally, and the other was actually a conductor of a major philharmonic orchestra and was traveling all over the world. And the teacher at the comprehensive school actually felt quite frustrated that he hadn't fully explored his musical potential. And so that was very interesting. So, it's never my judgment. It's up to each soul to determine how satisfied and fulfilled they felt. But it was very interesting seeing the similarity in their chart. So my job as an astrologer, I don't do client work anymore. I have no time. But when I used to do it, my job was, how do I help people live a bigger life? How do I help them optimize and maximize the pattern that is set? But how do I play it? How do I help them play it magnificently? whatever that represents. It needn't be public and loud in the world. It can be behind the scenes, working with children in third world countries. It can be a very quiet life, but an incredibly fulfilled one. So that's to answer your second question, which is almost easier than the first question, because coming back to your first question, what does it mean to be human? And that was actually one of my main themes looking at 2025. What does it mean to be human? Because with Pluto having just moved fully into Aquarius on December 19th next year until January 2044, so virtually 20 years, that raises questions of what is humanity, because the Aquarian energy is very linked to the people in a broad scale sense, the mass of the people, and the power of the people, but it's also linked to a very high level of innovation in technology and AI, and going beyond that to all kinds of I think the UK government website even has a section on it now called, I think it's called the augmented human. And we might get chills down the spine thinking about that one. And so because technology will become so advanced, and we're aware of nanobots that can be injected into people's bodies, or what was Elon Musk's recent brain chip, Neuralink.
Neuralink, yeah.
And on the one hand, we can say, well, sometimes these invasive new technologies can be miraculous, because if somebody's paralyzed through a car accident, it can help them walk again. Somebody's brain dead, it can help them kind of regain a lot of their original power. But that becomes a very slippery slope, doesn't it? Because who's then in control of the button? That's to me, that is a big, big, big giving away of power. But these issues around the invasiveness of technology into our body is going to become a bigger and bigger thing. I mean, for the last year or so, I know in Sweden, who are very far ahead of innovation, you can buy a chip which goes into your hand, which means you buy your train tickets faster. I know in certain outlets you can get a chip in your hand, so you don't have to kind of pay for your groceries with your credit card. It's all just via the chip in your hand. For me, I find that absolutely a no-go.
Scary, isn't it? Yeah, it's scary, and it feels like a choice point. That kind of technological path, or the more organic path that's more aligned with love and the spiritual journey, really, and the spiritual evolution of consciousness.
Absolutely. And I think this will be a major choice point. Going through 2025, I think there'll be micro choice points, mini and major. And that for me is a major one, a really major one, because for me, I wouldn't want anything invasive. And I'm sure they're going to be sold as a kind of win-win. You can get these nanobots, I've seen them on social media already, injected, that will just kind of eat up all the damage and any potential tumor in your body, and you'll never get sick. And isn't that amazing? Well, actually, I would probably run a mile from that. But I'm not suggesting that I'm making the decision for anybody. We each have to make our own decisions based on our own soul contract and what we want in our lives. For me, that is a no-go area. But, it's interesting, Sarah, isn't it? Because what does it mean to be human? I mean, I think we are already galactic hybrids. That's the tricky, we know that we are part of a galactic family. We know that the iron in our blood comes from the stars, the calcium in our bones. We are not already pure human. We are already a kind of galactic hybrid.
Interesting. It's interesting. When you're talking, I'm thinking about, the choice point of, connectivity, because it feels like, whatever we choose, we're moving into more connectivity. Are we going to be hooked up to the World Wide Web? And of course that can be positive as negative as well. But in terms of what you're talking about in technology of, having things actually within the body, or are we going to be connecting into the galactics, into the astrology, into the cosmos? and connecting with our own divinity as
I
well.
think I think what you're raising is absolutely a huge theme for 2025, because I think this is part of the timeline split, which I think is undeniable. This timeline split, and one timeline is much more synthetic and technological, and the other, absolutely, Sarah, is more natural and organic. And eventually we will lose the technology, because the technology is only a stepping stone to regaining our telepathy, our greater healing abilities. We won't need the gadgets, we won't need the iPhones and the computers.
Yes.
So yeah, very definitely that is a major choice point in the timeline split, which we're in right now, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So focusing in on the consciousness shift that we're going through as a collective, there's lots of talk about New Earth, and this channel is New Earth Co-Creators. So I'd love to chat with you about whether there are any astrological indications or support for the New Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's principally coming from the dwarf planets, the deep space planets, because most of these that we've discovered so far were only discovered really in the last 20 years or so, 25 years. So that's kind of a drop in the bucket if you're looking at many thousands of years of astrology. And the ones I've investigated so far have, incredible symbolism, because on the one hand, they're all creator gods, and they have a leading edge understanding of manifestation, of quantum physics, how we manifest, in our lives. But they also have this kind of deep remembrance of the earth and nature and harmony with nature and shamanic connection and getting back in the rhythm, the rhythm of the seasons, etc. And so it isn't just that we're going forwards in time, we're going back in time to regain this remembrance. And
That's
and that,
really interesting.
I think that's where we're headed. It isn't just a constant propulsion forwards. It's a reminder of where we've been. And I think this is, a couple of people I know already channel inner earth beings. I think we're going to see, more of that coming forwards, because the galactic beings aren't just out there in
Yes.
space, they're actually in the earth as well, I feel.
That's so interesting what you're speaking about. And, I don't know a lot about astrology, but I know a little bit about archetypes. And my understanding of the archetypes, it's that kind of deep symbology or imagery, and knowing that becomes part of our unconscious. In that sense, it becomes our inner voices, becomes who we are. So through that, connection with the planets, certainly the kind of old planets that we all knew, we've over the years developed those archetypes and those understandings and those connections, but we're really being asked to up the ante and kind of go up an octave quite quickly. Like these are all kind of quite newly discovered, my understanding. I've listened to you talking about the dwarf planets and the Kuiper belt objects, the sort of the out, and yeah, so I'm interested in how that's enabling us to form new archetypes and new visions for humanity, because we're really embodying new frequencies, allowing that to become part of our new mythology in a way. But because of the old connections with the indigenous kind of creation, it's a very interesting kind of pathway, isn't it? Sort of forwards and backwards at the same time.
Yeah, to kind of, I think what Richard Rudd writes beautifully about is an evolution, but also an involution,
Okay.
as the indigenous people see it, and that kind of electrified me. So yeah, great question, Sarah, because these dwarf planets are really being seen as a higher octave of consciousness. Our next step in, they're further out in space, and it's a new opening up. It's an expansion of our consciousness to something new in terms of our innate abilities, our innate power that we've forgotten. For instance, the dwarf planet Haumea is a great symbol for New Earth, because in the mythology, she's linked to the Hawaiian goddess of fertility, and she was able to birth babies from all over her body, not just the normal place, and kind of change herself from an old crone to a young maiden. And in her fire goddess aspect, she's said to have birthed the 8 islands of Hawaii, which was one of the clues to me that we are going to see some landmass changes with,
Wow,
extreme weather and
amazing.
seismic activity. So, but she also has the promise not only of new land masses or very old land masses re-emerging that are going to be pristine, unpolluted, all kinds of new plant life. And quite a few months ago, probably about 8 months ago, this gigantic mountain range was discovered off the coast of Chile that nobody had known about, with all kinds of new plant species and sea species in it. So I think with these changes, the extreme weather, seismic activity, all that kind of thing, that new Earth is new land masses are either going to be emerging from the seas and the oceans, and or are going to be revealed via some kind of, ice melting or whatever, to reveal really beautiful, pristine land. And that is literally going to be new.
Incredible. Well, it's
Literally.
quite literal as well as what the consciousness shift. It's kind of quite physical as well.
Absolutely, that literally new Earth. So we're going to be really understanding new plant species. I think we'll eat less, we'll eat more plant-based, we'll be eating high frequency foods. And this is all part of the physical transition, as you say, but it's also linked to a consciousness transition. And so, and we can look at other dwarf planets. I mean, Salacia is a big one as well, because in myth, she is the wife of Neptune. She's mermaid energy. She's linked to the shimmering sunlight, moonlight on the sea. I think she's very linked to photonic energy, that's kind of high frequency light. And we're getting, because we're at the peak of solar cycle 25, we're getting a lot of solar flares, which I think everybody's aware of. But it isn't just the sun throwing out these balls of radiation. They are actually new light codes.
Yes.
They're new light codes. And when I was having my week's rest, which was so welcome, in a place where you could actually see the sun for a week, which was remarkable for an English person, watching the sunsets. Do you know, if I was living in places like that where you could see the sunset every day, it'd be like a pilgrimage for me, because it wasn't just the sun going down, the colors were like I've never seen before, deep purples and magentas and lime greens, and they were shooting off in plumes all around the sun as it sank very rapidly. And I was just kind of hypnotized, thinking, my God, this isn't a normal sunset. And
Yes.
maybe my perception of the sun, or maybe it was literally that's what the sun was throwing out, but it was a series of incredibly powerful light codes that I felt all of us watching that. I mean, there were hundreds of us on this kind of precipice, were absorbing as ingredients for new
Absolutely.
evolution. And so Salacia, I feel, is also linked to a bigger understanding that's going to come in around light. Water is condensed light. I think she's very linked to light language. She was very prominent at gosh, I think it was the solar eclipse last October. I was in Glastonbury with Veda Austin, and it was one of the eclipses, and Salacia was exact on that eclipse. And so
No coincidences that you were with Vader at that time.
and she's saying water is condensed light, the
Absolutely.
information.
Yeah.
And so things like this, that when we either have Salacia prominent in our birth charts or we're receiving a transit from Salacia, this is just my theory, which I haven't tested out yet, but is that when people are going to start to spontaneously speak light language, because they're connecting to a higher level of consciousness? And that, I'm just throwing that out as a theory at the moment, but I think undeniably these dwarf planets are going to lead us to a higher level of consciousness, which is partly new and partly ancient.
That's fascinating, Pam. I love that you brought up the water and the consciousness of water, because I interviewed Vader a few months back, and in a way, it's a similar conversation. What is the water? you know, what it means to be human again, but looking at it through those filters rather than the astrological. So I'm not so surprised at all that you guys are connected.
And it's wonderful, because I think Veda strongly feels this, and I feel this too, that water is actually the evolutionary impulse for everything. My understanding of how the earth was created was via the water.
Mm.
Um, and when I was talking to Richard Rudd about that metamorphosis of the water nymph to the dragonfly, the way he describes it, this is true biologically, that one day the water nymph just decides it's not going to be an underwater water nymph anymore and climbs up a stalk of grass and kind of dries its wings in the sun. But the thing that makes it turn into a dragonfly is the water nymph it pumps its old body, which is full of water, into the wings of the dragonfly to enable the dragonfly's wings to spread out and to fly. She couldn't fly if the wings weren't expanded in that way from the water.
Incredible.
So the water is the evolutionary impulse.
But it's interesting because it's reflective of what we're being asked to get moved through as well, because we're kind of being asked to kind of embody that air element, in moving into the age of Aquarius as well. And I believe we've got kind of lots of, am I correct in saying a lot of the signs are going to be moving, planets are going to be moving into the air sign too? So it's almost like we're being called to go through the same process.
Correct. We're going to discover an awful lot of the out there. Now, the out there, because that's the air, out there is Pluto in Aquarius. It's not a water sign, it's an air sign. And it's going to be there till January 2044. Uranus begins to move into Gemini, an earth sign, this July, and stays there for another 7 to 8 years after that. So that you've got both of these very heavy, big outer planet archetypes in air signs, and they're moving, pretty much in step, given the length of their orbits. So we are going to see a lot more of activity out there in terms of innovation in aviation, which I've talked about a lot. We're going to see issues around the air, toxicity in air, and how do we clean that up? But also every time Pluto moves into Aquarius, and it's got a 248-year cycle, so it hasn't been there since 1798, we discover another layer of deep space, another layer of the
Wow.
That's
incredible, isn't it?
that's
so we better buckle up.
Yeah, in terms of
so I mean, that was actually a question, is like, because I was interested to see how all these shifts are shifting the astrology, because no doubt it's shifting our consciousness, but you're probably having to really pedal pretty quickly to keep up with the changes in astrology now. It probably looks different 20 years ago.
Totally. And, honestly, Sarah, I've said in several videos, I think our understanding of the cosmos could change so radically that all of my decades of study could just, that we discover that the cosmos is very different from the way I've learned it so profoundly. And I had to do that because I've had lifetimes doing this. So there wasn't a choice for me, and I've loved it, loved it, loved it. But I have to be open enough at this stage to say,
oh my goodness, yeah.
This is just what I've learned is actually a tiny part of a much greater understanding of the cosmos, and I have to be brave enough to ask those questions. And I had a very interesting conversation with Dr. David Clements recently, which many people have enjoyed. He was originally a mainstream academic theoretical physicist specializing in string theory. And his life changed when he started to be contacted by galactic beings, very high-level galactic beings, who now direct him to develop incredible high-frequency devices which are regenerative. But he's in constant contact with these beings who give him a very clear view of the cosmos. So we're having another conversation in about a week's time, and I'm going to be asking some very brave questions of these higher beings via David in terms of, tell me how astrology works or doesn't in this bigger context. So who knows where that's going to go. but I have to be brave enough to be open to that, because I think that is absolutely where we're headed.
Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? What comes up for me is that inner outer connection. What it's almost like a chicken and egg kind of discussion, isn't it? Because even if you just think about the naming of the planets and then the archetypes that become associated with that, is it our collective awareness of that then brings energies to us and vice versa? It's kind of how that unfolding, that co-creation takes place.
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. You're asking great questions, Sarah, because luckily one of the principal astronomers who's discovered many of these dwarf planets is an astronomer called Mike Brown, and he's American. And luckily, he very kindly is aware of astrology. He's very well versed in mythology, and he takes note of the specific time, date, that he's the moment of discovery. Now, that
Yes.
moment of discovery not only gives us the discovery chart,
Amazing.
which gives
I
us,
didn't know that.
a lot of information,
Yes.
and the patterns within that, but also the physical attributes of the dwarf planets. For instance, Homea, linked to the goddess of fertility, is egg-shaped.
Mm.
It's almost laughable.
It's
It's so little.
amazing, isn't it?
And I believe it was when his wife was pregnant, I believe, that he wanted to call this new dwarf planet discovery Homea, because of the link to fertility. And I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was true. So he is somehow, through synchronicity, he chooses names linked to the
Beautiful.
mythology, which he feels is appropriate. And then we astrologers kind of scuttle off for years and years and, investigate within people's charts and say, is that real? Is that true? Does it link? Is there, is there a synchronicity here between the name and how it's playing out in people's charts? It's very interesting that with Homea now, when we put that in people's charts, we find it is very linked to healing. They're running a healing center, or they are a healer. It's that kind of thing. You think, wow, isn't that incredible, that kind of synchronicity? But we're very lucky to have somebody like Mike Brown who can give us that
That's
specific,
fascinating.
isn't it just?
It's like you say, there's no coincidences.
It's amazing. So,
Yeah.
the inner and the outer, but you're so wise as well, Sarah, to bring up the inner and the outer, because that's what astrology is. Because if I'm looking at a birth chart, in that same moment, I'm looking at the pattern in the heavens at the same moment as I'm looking at that person's psyche.
Yeah.
At the same, it's an inner and outer. And that to me is really sacred, because I'm studying the pattern in the heavens and the geometry of that. And yet this complete stranger has come to me, and they could call themselves Fred as long as the birth data is correct. And I can anticipate exactly what the issues are in their life right now. Is it a big issue in their marriage? Is it a big issue in their career? Is it their health? Because I can clearly see that. But I'm reading the pattern in the heavens.
It's beautiful. We have the universe inside us.
Yeah.
That's the thing. When we start to look on these quantum levels, nothing is hidden. It's like all information is available. So then the question comes, what frequency do we tune into? Are we going to tune into the doom and gloom radio station or the love and light? We do have that choice point as well.
That is so, and that's why I bang on endlessly about that, because what we focus on expands. That's not a very poetic way of saying it, but it's the simplest way. What you focus on expands, because you are feeding the energy of that particular timeline. So that's why absolutely there's a terrible, horrific timeline of war and misery and disease and poverty and destruction. Absolutely. But the more of us that can focus on the joyful, loving timeline, that's where we're going to create the energetic momentum.
Yeah.
So
tipping point.
Yeah. And that's why, I've got this free 15-minute meditation every night, completely free to join. If you just check out my Sunday meditation video, it's all in there. No Zoom, no tech, no recordings. But many people across the world are doing this kind of thing. We're
Absolutely.
all adding to that momentum.
Creating that momentum. Yeah.
Because that's the choice. And many, many, many timelines exist, but they're two broad collective ones for sure.
And this community, this group consciousness, it's something that's come up in a lot of the podcasts. Talking with Rory Duff, he spoke about this shift into collective, working in groups to create change. And certainly I know we're both involved with the People's Health Alliance, and that's very much a part of the journey that we're on as well.
Yeah, and the People's Food and Farming Alliance, that's because Uranus is in Taurus, and that's a whole revolution in farming that we're going through at the moment. And things like it's grassroots. Aquarius is grassroots up. It's the power of the people. It's ordinary people like you and me, Sarah, coming together and say, how do we make a difference in the world? How do we create
Yes.
a loving world? Then because currently the world as it's been is not a great world. It's not a loving world. It's not a kind world. It's not for the benefit of the people. So what, as we humble individuals, can do to make a difference? And I think we are both in that game very much.
And that's very Aquarius, isn't it? In terms of that, being a facet of the diamond, that individual contribution to the whole, and us really bringing that in and having sovereignty of our own domain, but then allowing, holding hands in the circle. That's kind of the indigenous connection, to our roots again. It's like that community connection again.
Absolutely. And you raise a very good point, because Aquarian energy is quite paradoxical in a way, because it's all about celebrating yourself as an individual with your unique essence, your unique gifts, your authenticity in a fuller way than you ever had before. And yet, how does that plug into the group? How does that
Yes.
plug into the
Yeah.
whole? So it's kind of like, there's a beautiful Indian myth. I don't know if you know it, about Indra's net.
I've heard of it. I don't know a lot about it, but yeah.
It's beautiful that everything is a kind of mirror to everything else. We're coming together, and everything is magnifying everybody else's efforts, sort of thing.
Absolutely.
So we're
And
no longer alone. We're part of the group.
just touching upon that as well, the whole sovereignty piece, because I know you've been speaking about the Pisces pile up that we're literally just moving into the moment, so I do want to have a little chat about that. But that interesting shift into, is it 0 degrees of Aries, and how that is like a new dream and coming into our sovereignties, and what do we wish to create. So just kind of touching upon that shift that we're just coming into.
Yeah, this is so huge, Sarah. I mean, this is so huge because, and I'm going to probably have to do a separate video on this, because it's the rarity of the astrology that gives it potency, that gives it power.
Yes.
Because it isn't just that all of the outer planets within 15 months are changing sign. I mean, that's really rare.
Huge.
We haven't had that for 300 years. But if you add in the dwarf planets, some of them are changing sign, then I don't know how far you have to go back for that to have happened. So there's this very big sense of endings and beginnings. So the end of Pisces, 29 degrees of Pisces, is the very end of the zodiac. And Pisces is about Neptune, its ruler, is coming on to that. It's about dissolution. It's about the void. It's just about the end of an old world, not the world, but an old world, and the illusion and the
Yes.
veils and the deception. But 0 of Aries is actually the most important degree in the entire zodiac, because it's the first degree. And I call it the creator degree, because we've got a blank slate. We've got more of a blank slate than we have ever had.
It's so exciting.
Because the consciousness is changing, which you're very aware of, Sarah, with all your healing work. The energy is changing. We're getting a lot more galactic connection that will increase going through, which will expand our consciousness further. So, there's so many game changers.
Yes. And you're talking about all the outer planets changing. The outer planets are very much about that collective consciousness. So that's the level we're kind of shifting on. It's like boom, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is. And so it's unstoppable. The planets aren't going to start to go backwards. It's absolutely unstoppable. And so it's interesting that, yes, it's absolutely the entire collective, all of humanity. And from what I understand from several people, including Dr. David Clements, it isn't just the ascension, the upgrade, the evolutionary jump for humanity and the Earth, it's for the entire universe.
Yes. Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing, and I'm going to ask you more about, because I don't, I'm not sure I fully understand how that's going to work. But so what is exciting is Neptune on the 30th of March moves on to zero of Aries. It hasn't done that since 1861.
Wow.
Long time, so
Yeah.
165. Saturn on the 25th of May also moves on to zero of Aquarius, of Aries.
Aries.
Hasn't done that for 29.5 years. So they both come together exactly to the degree, zero of Aries in July, but to the minute, zero of Aries, can't quite remember the minutes, bit in on 20th of February 2026.
Okay.
Now, they come together very reliably every 36 years. Every 36 years they come together, but not at zero of Aries.
That makes a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, last time it was 1987. I think that was in Capricorn, which was to do with walls and building structures and the old order. So you had the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Empire. And prior to that, it was 1952-53, and that was in Libra. That was because it resonates very much to Russian history as well. And that was the death of Stalin. And so they come together very reliably, but it is at least 12,000 years, and please correct me, anyone, if that's not correct, but to my research, it's been over 12,000 years since that Saturn and Neptune have come together at zero of Aries. And I've got people writing to me at the moment saying, well, I have my Saturn in Aries and I'm not 12,000 years old. Now, clearly, but all of those conditions have to apply. It's Saturn, Neptune coming together at zero of Aries. It's not any other degree in the zodiac. So one expression of that is making real the dream. And it's a whole new episode for humanity. And I'm more and more looking at astrology as modeling clay. I really want to move away from what are the planets
destiny
doing.
Yes, so it's malleable.
Yeah. So what do we want it to be? What do we want this dream to be? This new episode for humanity, what do we want it to be?
I love that.
And what do if this is about regaining our sovereignty, we've given away our power to leaders, politicians, all of those external authority figures, which losing trust in.
A hierarchical power, so that bringing it back to a level again, the power structures.
Exactly. And, that's all cracking and collapsing. But we've equally, I believe, given away our power to the planets. People come to astrology. What are the planets doing to me? What is my fate?
Well, it's interesting because it's then a way of staying in victimhood, isn't it?
Correct.
Whereas if we use it as a tool to walk the ascension path, it's a much more empowering approach, isn't it? Than just saying, oh, this is in my stars.
Absolutely, 100%. So, from my humble point of view, and I'm only speaking for my own astrological practice at the moment, I'd like to encourage people to see it as much more malleable than it has been. Don't give away your power to the planets. See the pattern, understand as far as you're able the astrology, and say, how do I want to play this section of the music? How do I want to play it? What's the modeling clay? What's fixed in the pattern, but where is my latitude to play it magnificently?
I love that, Pam. Thank you so much for clarifying that. It's kind of done a full circle to my first point, about destiny, free will. We've spoken a lot about the consciousness, what it means to be human from a consciousness perspective. We touched very briefly on the sort of biology of this when you spoke about, in a way, we're hybrids. I'd love to sort of go into the biology, because I listened to your wonderful chat with Richard Rudd, and he was talking about the genetic mutation. And I know there's kind of various pieces to that. So is that something you can clarify a little bit?
Yeah, I will share what I know. I mean, that was so exciting with Richard Rudd. That
it was incredible.
Gene key system, it was Pluto, I think on the 30th of January, if I remember correctly, Pluto in his system moving into gate 41. I'm not at all familiar with gene keys, but that for his system was the beginning of a genetic mutation, which would take till the end of 2027 to complete. And at the same time, it's very interesting that both Cryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, and Greg Braden have talked about, in their different modalities, talked about the reemergence of our 24th chromosome.
Yes.
In about 200,000 years ago, presumably this happened with the galactic beings. Chromosome 2 and chromosome 7 were spliced together to leave us with 23 chromosomes, which made us more human, to feel human emotion, but we lost our multidimensionality, or a great part of that. That is now coming back online. And from what I understand, it is the solar flares, or rather the light codes being carried by the solar flares, that are reactivating our strands, our dormant strands of DNA, to bring the multidimensionality back online. And that is happening really quickly. And once that starts to happen, and many people are feeling this sense of greater spaciousness, an expansion of their consciousness, they're becoming more telepathic, their healing abilities are expanding. And so the mantra I use for those simple 15-minute free meditations is, we're welcoming in an expanded consciousness of love.
And the field is very much supporting that at the moment, isn't it? If we surrender to that expansion, there's these huge opportunities to embody that love.
Absolutely. And people report back to me that they're just feeling this tsunami of love, that as you know, as we come together in the meditation, connect with our hearts, and people are sort of walking over hills and mountains and streams and rivers, and then, you know, other people, other animals, other beings, galactic beings, are all joining us in this kind of army of love. And it brings me to tears, honestly, because it was such a simple idea. But, you know, it's thrilling to think, if love is the highest vibration, it is so easy for us to come together with free meditations at a particular time. And if you live in Australia and it's the middle of the night, just set a clear intention you're joining with that group energy, or whoever else, you know, whoever else's meditations you're joining. But it's all cumulative. It's all adding to this momentum of love, which is changing our timelines in every moment.
And Lynn McTaggart has done incredible research, hasn't she, about
Fabulous.
all of this?
Fabulous. And what I love on her website is she has that tab called evidence. And you can go and just check all, because she's quite scrupulous in her, you know, control versus, you know, what we were trying to do, because I've joined a couple of her meditations, and she's very scientific in her method. And I love she's done that. And of course, you know, Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about this. Dr. Joe Dispenza has got so much evidence via his workshops. So, you know, this is emerging into the field with so much proof for our innate sovereignty and power, which we've just lost in recent lifetimes.
Well, I mean, if we cut ourselves, the body knows what to do, doesn't it? It knows how to heal. So, you know, the system does want to move towards healing. And so we do have that template, you know, within us. Do you feel that a lot of the, would I call it, kind of awakening templates are being activated at this current time? And is the astrology playing a big role in that as well?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And again, I come back to the dwarf planets and the power of. I'm trying to explain this kind of simply, because it isn't just the archetypes themselves. It's when they lock into very specific geometry,
yeah,
that they become activated. And then on top of that, if they're on specific degrees that are very hot and powerful degrees, you know, the whole thing becomes a kind of boiling pot of a jump in our consciousness. And yes, I go back again to the dwarf planets, to Homer, to Selassie. Maki is another one that's being very strongly activated at the moment. And that is about a whole new worldview. It's linked to the Rapa Nui people, the creator god of Easter Island. And Easter Island, and this is in the history books, was sort of laid waste through the European pirates arriving and, you know, cutting down all the trees and bringing disease and, you know, really destroyed the ecosystem. And at one point, there were only 111 inhabitants left on Easter Island. But incredibly, from that tiny population base, they were able to regenerate the population, but also the ecosystem to come back to thriving. And it's partly because there's a very rare naturally occurring chemical in the soil called rapamycin, which you can, by the way, buy as a food supplement, which costs the earth.
Okay.
But that's another very powerful archetype for New Earth,
Yes.
literally regenerate. And then you move to Sedna, the whole myth of Sedna, which I'm sure people are quite familiar about, where her father chucked her out of the canoe in the storm, chopped off her fingers, and she floated down to the deep. She drowned, but her fingers became these brand new, incredibly beautiful sea creatures. So that wasn't just a transformation, it was a metamorphosis, it was a complete change in state. So there's some big clues in the astrology of, and this goes back to Richard Rudd, and I'm interviewing Lee Harris next week, who's
Wonderful.
got a book coming out imminently called The Future Human. And he's also talking about this new biology, not just new consciousness, but new biology, as Richard Rudd is. So I am always led by the archetypes in the astrology, because I've been talking about Hermir and Sedna for a couple of years, and I was anticipating this would be a new consciousness, a change in state, and the beginning of a metamorphosis to produce a new biology, to produce a new biological human with a higher consciousness. I didn't have any evidence then. I just had the archetypes, the astrological archetypes to inform me. But because I've been around the track a few times, I always trust the astrology, and then I wait for it to manifest in the world. Do you know
And
what I
you're
mean?
great at finding the people that are speaking it from other angles as well, Pam, on your YouTube channel.
It's great because I think, wow, bullseye, that's great. That kind of fills in that picture, wow, that's amazing. And it's very exciting because it's like a kind of theoretical multidimensional jigsaw. And then you see kind of popping off in the world, whether it's via physicists or biologists or spiritual people, you think, wow, that's thrilling because it's fulfilling what I regard to be a divine plan for humanity.
Yeah, and you've found some wonderful young people, haven't you, on your Facebook, innovators, very young.
Isn't that exciting?
It's incredible.
Aquarius energy is linked to genius, it's linked to youth, it's linked to innovation, it's linked to somebody really finding, their unique gift to bring to the world. So, and I post them almost every day on Facebook, and you'll see them, Sarah, and that's the only social media platform apart from YouTube I'm using. But some of these children are 12 years old.
Yes, it's incredible, isn't it?
They're winning science prizes because they're finding incredible ways to produce free energy or water in an area of desert. I mean, it just blows my mind, these children.
So they're come in with all these templates already activated whilst we're trying to still kind of play catch up and shift. They're already the new humans. And so we can look to them as much as anything else, really.
They absolutely are, Sarah. And, take my hat off to these incredible, because they're going to be our future leaders. They don't want to be leaders in the old sense of top down, but they will be the visionaries, the inventors, the innovators, the progressives. And we, as the older generation, myself particularly, will be following their ideas and saying, this is phenomenal. How exciting. It's natural, it's organic, and it's thrilling because it's changing the world.
It's super exciting. I love this about your work, Pam. You always put the positive angle on everything and really focus on that. That's so important.
I kind of feel it in my bones because, I really do try and walk my talk in incredibly simple ways, but I can just drop into bliss. I mean, my walks through ancient woodland every morning in whatever weather are non-negotiable because my neighbour's dog taps his watch and waits for me. So that's kind of non-negotiable. And I was walking through the woods this morning. For once, it wasn't raining. And there was a touch of spring and that kind of electricity and that kind of lime green appearing in the moss. And I could feel the elementals, and I was just dropping into bliss. And this is not complicated. I'm not going into a ritual or a ceremony or I'm just looking at nature in awe and thinking I am just in pure bliss with wonder at the life force which emerges so reliably every spring. I just love it. I just love it.
And you're very much in the shifting into the heart space. You know, I know a lot of your practices, a lot of the practical advice that you talk about are shifting into your heart space. And when we do that, we can be present with the beauty of our world, really.
Absolutely. And with your work, Sarah, with all the healing you're doing, this is your bread and butter too. This is at the core of your work. And that's where we're headed. We're headed out of the mind, which is so much smaller. We're headed out of the information age, TikTok, Twitter, short attention span, into something much more profound, which is the heart. And the heart is obviously the place where love emerges from, but it's also, I think, that's the center of a physiological harmony within ourselves of breath, brain, heart, but also a harmony with all that is.
Yeah, very much so.
With inner and out. This is kind of Lemurian, I feel, with
Yeah.
inner and outer. And that just feels so simple and so fabulous.
It is simple, isn't it? When we put it down to that, just keep coming back. And
Yeah.
you know what the things that you've been talking about, it very much so feels like a remembering, of our
Yeah.
multidimensional roots.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I feel, so much of the ancient wisdom of the indigenous people, but I feel it'll go even deeper. I think it will be a friend and colleague of mine, American astrologer Martha Alter Hines is one of the people I know who's channeling inner earth beings, and I know there are other people who are doing this too. And that is thrilling because that may seem kind of wild and wacky and crazy, but they have so much to teach us that in our arrogance of we are a sophisticated modern society, we've just dismissed. But I don't think the world we have created is something to be admired. I think the ancient beings, well, they just have so much wisdom that we we should be on our knees in holding sacred space and listening to what they're saying is my view.
Absolutely. It feels like there's a lot of healing. And I feel that one of the most important things is to be doing that heart healing, that trauma work at this time,
And
because
that's a big part
we've
of
all
what
been
you're
so
doing.
traumatized by the world that we live in. It's fried our nervous systems as well. The fast pace, of everything happening. So it's how can we come back to ourselves and come back to the heart? It's a journey of healing, really.
And this is so much, excusing the pun, at the heart of what you're doing, Sarah. But I think even more important now, your work is even more important because things are going to speed up faster and faster and faster. They're not going to slow down. And you were going to get very jazzed up, and
That's
particularly
interesting. I'm pleased you've mentioned that because it's one of the things that I wanted to speak with you about because I went to the dentist last week and he said to me, is it really 6 months ago that you came along? It feels like last week. And, this acceleration of time, what's going on with that astrologically?
well, it's partly because the outer planets are moving out of heavy, slow earth and water into air and fire, which are fast. If you think a plane goes faster than a boat, they're very fast as elements. It's also Saturn has been, and I did a video on this in March 2023 because Saturn moved into Pisces then, and Saturn represents 3D density, linear time, and Pisces dissolves. So that's why people are experiencing some time slippage and just driven along this bit of road and here it comes, weird things. But also because we're shifting upwards in consciousness away from 3D-ness, we know that in those realms, time does not exist in the same way as we've lived it here by the clock. All of that's going to disappear, and we're going to be living much more in the now, in the moment, because that is where our power lies, and that's the kind of gateway. And Tucker was talking about this last week, the gateway to multidimensionality as well. We've got to be in the now, not
Yes.
leave power to the past or the future to allow that shift to happen. So it's a combination of factors, but whatever, our day-to-day life is going to feel, certainly in the short term, until we can drop into that now, faster. So if you don't have a grounding practice, bare feet on the grass, bare feet on the earth, if it's hideous weather, if you live in the UK through winter, you can candle gaze, you can do breath work, you can do yoga, you can tai chi, qigong. Have something that decompresses the zuzziness.
Yeah.
And particularly because we're so plugged into technology, and I think particularly the young people being, kind of living via technology, they've been brought up with it. That's going to create a kind of ungroundedness potentially. And it's really important that we decompress and bring ourselves back to earth.
Absolutely. Thank you for the practical advice. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we finish up today? I mean, I feel that I'm pretty much through in terms of being human, all the questions that I kind of formulated in my head. Had intended to ask you about this year, but I know that you've been speaking a lot about that in recent videos. But if there's anything that feels important to share at this time, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, a few things actually, and you've asked great questions, Sarah. And I love that it's been different because it makes me think. So definitely the grounding. The UK is not great in winter, but find a way to do that. Find a way to decompress. Listen to sacred music. Listen to Tibetan bowls. Meditate. Just breath work. Even if it's a few minutes a day, that's really important. Live from the inside out, not the outside in. And by that, I mean stamp, dominate your days with feelings of love, joy, gratitude, peace, and bliss, because that will define your outer reality day to day. And do it as a game. Watch it. Watch how it changes relationships and interactions through your day. And be kind. Be kind. Everybody's on their journey, and we're going through very accelerated times right now.
Yeah.
There's been no rehearsal to this. And be loving. Be kind and be loving to all those. I've had a very challenging relationship with a neighbor, and I just keep ho'oponoponing her to death, really. I just keep sending her love, and that has really radically changed that relationship. And I won't rise to the feisty bait. I'll just keep sending love, and it has really changed that relationship. So be kind, be loving, and that will define your reality.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Pam. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today. And thank you for sharing all your incredible insights and wisdom.
Yeah, it's been great. I've loved it, actually, Sarah.
Oh, I'm pleased you've loved it. I've loved it also. It's been absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone listening in today.
Lots of love, everybody. Lots of love for now. Bye.